What's up guys? Today we're going to be showing you how to remove a flywheel on this Polaris RZR XP1000 using the SuperATV flywheel removal tool. So let's get right to it. The first thing you're going to do is go ahead and remove your passenger side wheel and tire. Next, you're going to want to go ahead and remove your shock. I always like to remove my hardware on the nut side, so I always put my impact on the nut. It's just easier on the hardware, it's easier on the shock bushings. Now we're going to remove our sway bar link. Now we're going to lift up on the trailing arm and remove our bolt from our shock. Then we're just going to grab our shock and move it right out of the way. So now what we're going to do is disconnect the wiring harness connected to the stator cover. So if you're looking at your cover, you're going to move your hand right to here, and then you're just going to follow this wire all the way back and disconnect it. So we're just going to reach right back here on this motor mount tube. Find this harness, you'll have a connector. You want to lift up on the tab and then pull the plug apart. So this tab right here is what you're lifting up on. I just use my fingers to pull it up and then grab the connector right here, just like so, pull it right out. So the next thing that you're going to do is come to the top of the stator cover. You're going to find this sensor. You're going to follow the wiring for the sensor all the way around. It's going to come to this connector right here that'll be attached to the transmission. This connector will be laying on the transmission just like so. What we're going to do is push down on this tab right here. I like to push the connector together, push down on the tab. Now what we're going to do is remove all of the hardware securing the stator cover to the engine. So now that all of our hardware is removed from our stator cover, we're going to remove the cover. A lot of times these covers are pretty stuck. Sometimes you can pull them off by hand. You can get them to move a little bit, but a lot of times what you'll have to do is there's a tab right here on top. I like to try to take a pry bar, rest the pry bar up against the engine block, and just kind of pry out. You don't want to pry too much on the block or the cover. Now if you have to get down in between here, it's okay, but you don't want to wedge, you don't want to beat a screwdriver in there or anything like that. You want to be very careful not to damage the mating surfaces of the engine block or the stator cover. As you can see, we've got ours kind of started here. I think we may need a little on the bottom, but I think ours is going to come off. So I always try to grab it like this, and then it's just a nice wiggle and straight pull off. And our wiring harness that we were unplugged earlier, you just want to grab that. So now that we have our stator cover removed and out of the way, the first thing you're going to look to do here is remove the torque limit gear pin. Whenever we pulled our stator cover off, the torque limit gear pin stayed with our stator cover. If yours doesn't, then what you'll do is just grab a hold of it, kind of wiggle until you get your torque limit gear pin out. Then you're going to grab your torque limit gear. The next thing we'll do is remove our flywheel bolt from our flywheel. So now it's time to grab the SuperATV flywheel removal tool. One thing to keep in mind is that the threads are left hand, which are going to match the threads on the flywheel, which are left hand thread. So what you're going to do is take this tool, thread it on as far as it'll go, snug it up just a little bit, and we're going to tighten this bolt, and that's going to pull our flywheel off of our crankshaft. So now we're going to take our tool, thread it onto the flywheel. We'll grab an adjustable wrench and just snug it down just a little bit. So now what we're gonna do is tighten our bolt up on our flywheel removal tool, and that's gonna pull the flywheel off of the crank. As you can see, it came off pretty easy there. And the bolt inside of the tool, so this bolt here will be right-hand thread. The puller itself is left-hand thread. The hardware, the bolt here, is right-hand thread. So now that the flywheel is removed from the engine, now's a good time to go through and clean up the gasket surface here. As you can see, there's a little bit of excess gasket left on the engine case. You don't want any of that. So what I do is just take a razor blade, make sure you keep it good and flat, and just go through, scrape all of the gasket off, and then we'll take a little bit of brake clean and just kind of wipe down the surface, make sure it's as clean as it can possibly be. So we have our gasket surface cleaned on our engine block. We have our flywheel. So what we're gonna do is go ahead and reinstall it. On the flywheel, you're gonna notice that there's a keyway. You need to line that keyway up with the keyway on the crankshaft itself. So we'll just take it, slide it around until the keyway lines up. You'll kind of feel it snap into place there. So now we're going to reinstall our flywheel bolt. And you will want to torque this bolt to 129 foot-pounds. In order to torque this bolt, you will need the flywheel holder tool. You can pick one of those up from Polaris. It wraps around the flywheel. That way you can get a torque wrench on this and torque it to 129 foot-pounds. Today, we're gonna use an impact. We recommend that you don't do this. The reason that you wouldn't wanna do this is that you could potentially break the bolt off into the crankshaft. So now we're gonna take our torque limit gear, and we're gonna line up our torque limit gear with our starter gear. So to make sure it lines up, just like so. We'll take our torque limit pin, slide it in, just like so. So as you can see, our gear is meshing with the shaft on our starter, and then I can feel that it has made contact and is meshing with our starter gear. So as you can see, there's two locations where the engine cases mesh together. I like to take a dab of silicone and put right here. This will be right above this dowel pin. And then right over here, there's another section where they mesh together. So 99% of the time when you go to remove the stator cover, you're gonna tear this gasket. We didn't, and this gasket is still in good shape. We're gonna go ahead and reuse it. I highly recommend that anytime you remove the stator from your machine, you purchase a new OEM gasket from Polaris. Make sure you clean the surface up real good, reinstall the new gasket, and then we're gonna install the stator cover. Again, same concept applies from earlier. Don't get your fingers in between here, because as soon as you get this thing close, it's gonna want to draw it right in to the engine. As you can see, it kind of drew in. Let's give it a few good taps. Make sure your bolt holes are lined up, and ours are. So I'm gonna go ahead and reinstall all of the hardware for the stator cover. Once all our hardware is started, we're gonna go through and double check to make sure everything's good and started straight. I like to just take my socket with an extension, just get a good couple turns on these before we run them in. So now that everything's good and started, what we're gonna do is go through, run everything up. I'm gonna use an impact. I'm not gonna tighten them with an impact. We'll come back and we'll tighten them down with a ratchet. And you will want to torque these as well to the OEM Polaris specification. Now we're gonna grab our harness for our sensor, run it back around how it was routed previously, and plug it back into the connector. Just like that. And then we're gonna grab the wire, route it back how it was from the factory, and plug it back in that location on the motor mount. And we're gonna grab our shock, get our shock hardware reinstalled. The big washer is gonna go on the side that's not directly touching the sway bar. The flat washer will go on the nut side. And we'll just go ahead and fully tighten our hardware here and here. Now we're gonna tighten our shock hardware. Lastly, we're gonna reinstall our wheel and tire. So once you went through, fully tightened all your hardware, torqued everything to factory specs, that's all there is to it to use SuperATV's flywheel removal tool on this Polaris RZR XP1000. Be sure to check the description below to pick yours up today, and while you're there, drop a like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.